theater, you know. And every time, I'm gonna give you an example of a kabuki theater. Every time we have one of these shootings, whether it's at a school, whether it's at a church, or wherever the heck it might be, we stand up and go through this theatrical production where we are outraged and we are sorry. We extend our sorrow to the families involved and our prayers up to God. And we're going to do something to prevent this from ever happening again in our country because this is not us. And then after the show, the curtains close and we go home and we wait for the next event. And they keep coming and they keep coming. But the show goes on. Nobody actually says, what is the problem? What we do is we digress. We say, all of these people are getting killed in America because of all this hate, and it's happened all this time over all these years and decades in this country. We should do something about a uniform uh, identity processing when people go to buy guns at supermarkets. You know,
And I suppose the question is, well, why don't we just go after the root cause of our inalterably violent culture? And I guess the
yes.
question to me is, how far back do you want to go? Because it would really go back to the first settler colonialists massacring the indigenous
No,
people on this continent. You go
it's not
back
a
that
question
far,
of.
it's
It's not a
their
question of
tactics.
how.
Because, well, we see
Yeah,
all their
yeah,
tactics carried out in every way and in every part of our national character.
yeah. But that's the point. You said it right there. National character. You know, we don't have to talk about all these incidences. We don't have to go back and say what date do we start this. We say what does this say about our national character? What is our national character? You know, our national character happens to be one of violence. That happens to be in our character as a nation. Violence. I don't know how the hate comes into it over and over and over again against any variety of people and situations and lifestyles. But wherever there is this conflict, it becomes violent. And that's a part of our character, about our national essence. And this is what we have to face down. First of all, we have to stand up to facing it down. We have to stand up to saying, this is who we are. This is how we have been. This is our history. This is our present. Let's deal with this. And the gun issue goes away. We lynch people when hung them with ropes. We burn people in buildings. We stone people with stones.
We
You know,
pestilenced people with blankets. We were into mass genocidal biological warfare back when that didn't even really exist. So, what was the difference? I mean, yeah, guns are on the rise today and almost just fetishized to a point where, yeah, I think guns do hold a special place in our national focus. But you don't cure the ills of this violent society just by controlling guns.
well, what is the special place that guns have in our I mean, hunting, is that what it is? The
No,
Indians hunted without
it's
guns. We
it's not.
trapped.
No,
I
it's not
mean,
even that. I
what?
mean,
Okay.
like
I
our,
mean,
even say
what is it?
our modern day
What? Listen, no,
collecting
this,
many
but
guns
it
is
has
like,
nothing to do with anything. Culturally, what? I mean, what does it mean? I mean, what is a gun
what?
for? To shoot an Indian? I mean, uh, uh, to move up into the mountain and shoot a bear? I mean, what is a gun for? I mean, if we see a gun as some kind of idol, some kind of thing to be worshipped, or we see gun as a tool so that we could put a plate of food on the table. well, we don't need to do that anymore.
No, at
We go
some
to the
point it
butcher shop and
morphed
things are
into a culture of status and prestige as well, and just the symbol of this entire movement. It's become symbolic. I think that's the big problem when it's not. It's just a way of killing.
look. I've been looking at again, and I do this from time to time. I was looking at the Second Amendment. You know, can I speak on the Second Amendment for a few minutes here?
You have the First
Okay.
Amendment right to do so.
And interestingly enough, they say that those two things are tied together because this article that I was reading by the Libertarian Institute says that the the Second Amendment is the fundamental amendment that makes all the other other amendments
Oh.
work. That without the Second Amendment, we would have no Bill of Rights.
See, I would
You
have thought the
know,
first, but well, whatever.
no, no. This is from the Libertarian Institute. Says in a very real way. I'm reading in a very real way. The right to
Hold
bear
on.
arms.
You said Libertarian Institute. Just I want that to be clear
Right,
from the first. Libertarian Institute.
right.
Go on.
Yes, libertarian.
Yep.
Okay. And he says in a very real way, the right to bear arms is the guarantor of all other rights, and any threat to the Second Amendment endangers the entire Bill of Rights. That's an amazing to me statement. You know, that my right to vote or whatnot is all tied up in the my right to have or not have a gun.
I guess
You
I
know,
choose not to see it so violently. I guess the fact that I would need to have a gun to protect all my other rights. That's why the other that's
how
the
can you?
I've thought that's why the other rights were there, so that using a gun would be the last line of defense against a
But
tyrannical government or
then
others.
you say that insurrection should be the order of the day. That we should maintain our freedoms through insurrection. Uh, Listen, the Second Amendment. It says, and I'm going to read it again, and I'm going to read it again, and I'm going to read it again. It says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay, now as I learned how to read, and especially as I learned how to read bills and laws, and the first line, the first few words in any bill tells me what the bill is about. In order to establish a proper government, when one nation has to dissolve itself from another, then we have to tell them why we're doing that. I mean, the first part of it tells you what it's about. The first line, the first few words is a well regulated militia. And then it goes on and says why we're interested in this well regulated militia. It says because it's necessary, being necessary to the security of a free state. State. You know, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed upon. In other words, the right of the people to keep and bear arms has to do with a well regulated militia, and it has to do with a free state. And I will submit to you that a well regulated militia does have gun control. Yeah.
I would I could also theorize that this amendment was just put in there so that the newly formed
Well,
national
yeah.
government would not have to
Yeah.
provide weapons for people when they wanted them to militia
Yeah.
up. They're like, well,
That was
you
part of
just use your own and keep your own, so we
that was
don't have
part.
to give you a gun.
Another part of that was that they didn't want if they didn't have the right to regulate the guns, then the federal government was the only one that had the right to regulate the guns, and the states didn't want that. And also, of course, if we really go back to its origins and we start talking about the slavery and slave patrols and the militia being used to get runaway slaves, particularly in Virginia, that wasn't going to vote its approval for the Constitution unless they got that amendment, and a couple other states, but particularly Virginia. The origins of it are suspicious in the first place. But what it says is that a well-regulated militia. It starts with a well-regulated militia, and it says that the only reason that the people have uh, cigars is because of this well-regulated militia, because it's necessary for a free state. That's what it says. You know, uh, but here again, going back to the libertarian, he says, as a gun owner and American, you have a duty. You have a duty because you get this threat to all the other amendments, the whole Bill of Rights, if you don't recognize what it is that they interpret the Second Amendment to be. As a gun owner and as an American, you have a duty. A duty is what you have to defend your rights. You understand? You know, they admonish us that we have to defend this Second Amendment the way that they interpret it today, because they didn't interpret it this way throughout the first 150 or 100, 200, or whatever number of years of our Constitution. You know, Earl Warner said the Second Amendment is not fundamental to liberty. He was the argument on the other side, you know. But look, okay, this is what I love. To talk about the Supreme Court cases involving the Second Amendment and where we were and what we said about the Second Amendment throughout our history, I am wanting to do this using this short chronology that I got that is written into this article by the Libertarian Institute, because there was a time a couple of years ago when I went into Google or any of them, and I said, let me have a chronology of the Supreme Court cases involving the Second Amendment. I would get a long list of cases. You know, now when I go and ask that same question, I get these articles by basically guns rights peoples. And I don't get a long list of just plain chronology that I can look at those cases for myself. Besides all those pop-ups and advertisements that interfere with my reading, uh, but this is what I get. I get a limited amount of information, and none of it's straight anymore.
So I would take that to say that the Second Amendment is in no way this, what's the word? Just revered, venerated bastion of gun rights that a lot of people think it is.
No.
But it's just something that people use, and some of the people who
Right.
want guns and violence to that degree
Right. Right.
to, make what they
Right.
do legal. And I mean, I come back to this point too, though. Like, in an ideal world, do you limit how many guns someone can have? No, okay, in an ideal world, no one would have guns and no one would hurt each other, whatever. I mean, like, in a somewhat ideal world, let's say that. Would you limit the types and number of weapons people could and should have?
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to talk about the Supreme Court cases, but first I want to say this in response to your question. You know, in an ideal world, we would take a look at what's happening in our society and regulate ourselves to the benefit of everybody. You know, if we find out that a virus is harmful to us, then we find a way to eradicate the virus. If we find out that killing people with guns is the disease, then we have to come up with a vaccine for that. You know, we need a vaccine for guns in this country. 1875, There was in Louisiana what was called the Colfax County Massacre. What happened here was that there was an election between a Republican. Well, first of all, there was a whole lot of stuff going on in this country at that time with Reconstruction and people in the South, in particular, trying to reassert themselves over the former slave populations and to come back to this issue where we don't argue about white supremacy and equality in this country. And so they had all kinds of strange laws. But there was one that the militia in Louisiana was black and they didn't have guns when they went out to protect things, as they did the courthouse in Colfax, Louisiana, in Colfax County. The courthouse had to be protected because the Republicans won an election the Democrats thought they should have won. The Democrats, you understand, were not the Democrats of today, but they were the conservative right wing of the day. So the White League surrounded a courthouse where these militiamen were in there to protect, and they shot at it with cannons and they shot at it with guns, and they killed 156 black people. Three white men died. One admittedly was shot by his own people. So maybe two. I don't know how they died. But here's the thing, they did not bring them up on charges of murder because they could not. Because there was a law in Louisiana that said a white man could not be put on trial for the murder of a black man. It was legal to kill black people. Consequently, what they did in terms of the state was legal. The federal government thought that there was a problem with this, since the federal government, of course, is the one who ordered, it was Ulysses S. Grant, the National Guard, the militia, to go in there and protect the courthouse. So they took these people to trial. And what did they charge them with? They charged them with violating the black militia's right to bear arms. Okay? Yeah, this is the 1875. We're already avoiding taking a look at the gun issue. We're already avoiding taking a look at the racism involved and what kind of a country we are. And we're going to look at this narrow interpretation of the Second Amendment as to whether or not this black militia had the right to bear arms. And the court ruled that the militia had the right to bear arms because the state, because the federal government, excuse me, was the people responsible for the Second Amendment, not the state. Basically, is what it comes down to. And consequently, they say the state has the right to make whatever rules it wants and enforce whatever rules it wants. And if the state wants to say that it was not a crime, it was not a crime. But they did say that an individual's right to bear arms in this case would be left to the state. So they didn't make a issue of saying that an individual right to bear arms is constitutional. They said whether or not an individual can bear arms is left to the state. You know, I mean, this is an escape from making a decision about whether or not you're allowed to kill black people. But in the process of it, we get a ruling on the Second Amendment that says that it is a state's right and not an individual's right to make rules and all that kind of thing. Okay? That's the first one that they brought up in this article from the Libertarian Institute, which somehow or another they think supports their position. I say take a look at it, America. Take a look at it. When you use the Second Amendment to escape charging people with murder, what does that make of you? But let's understand the outcome. An individual did not have a right to bear arms. Presser versus Illinois in 1886. Now, this is an interesting one. Presser, Presser was a German industrial worker. He came over part of the German migration. And there were a lot of them in Illinois, and they were all working in industry, and they were subject to suppression by, for example, the Pinkertons, that violent detective group that went around and enforced.
Oh, I don't know. They always seemed okay to me.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You remember that shootout here in Pennsylvania, and Holmesburg and all that. Okay. Uh, so this guy Presser, he trained some German guys who are industrialists like himself to march and carry guns. And they had a parade, and he got arrested. He argued that the state law was unconstitutional, as the Second Amendment granted him the right to form and maintain his own well regulated militia. But the court ruled that the Second Amendment did not apply to the states. The Second Amendment did not apply to the states. And so the states were free to regulate or ban militias and guns in any way they choose. That's in 1886. Okay? The states have the right to regulate and ban guns. National Firearms Act was passed in 1934. It was challenged in court in what was that, 1939, I guess it was, by Miller and another guy who were bank robbers who were coming into Chicago from Louisiana, I think it was, with sawed-off shotguns. Well, the state didn't appreciate that because the National Firearms Act said that you don't have unusual firearms in the hands of individuals, only those that were common. Now, okay, all right. So, the shotgun is not used by your militia, so therefore, they could not be used by a well regulated so called militia or by individuals. Now, that sounds weird. That people could use the guns that are used by the state militia, but they can't use guns that are unusual to it, and a sawed-off shotgun was unusual to it. So now we get into this thing of what kind of gun you can hold, you can have. We're not arguing the issue now anymore of guns. You understand? We're arguing the issue of what kind of gun.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The ruling was that only those guns that could be reasonably used by militia. And you know what that says today with respect to machine guns. Okay, now listen to this. Understand this, everybody. Please, please, please. It wasn't until 2008, District of Columbia versus Heller. Heller was an off duty cop who wanted to keep a loaded gun in his house, and it was against the rules, the law in D.C. to have loaded weapons. Okay, Scalia ruled that weapons in common use for protection are okay. Okay, okay, okay. Scalia actually gave the right of deciding to own or not to own, to load or not to load, to use or not to use a gun, not anymore as something only decided by the state, but as something that is a right of the individual. This is 2008. And when was the Constitution? Okay, 2008. This is the first ruling. This is the first time in all our history that we said an individual had a right to own a gun. 2008. 2010 solidifies it. McDonald versus Chicago. When Chicago tried to ban handguns, you can remember the problems that they have in Chicago with handguns. And Chicago tried to ban handguns. But McDonald said no. He said, no, I have a right to have a handgun. And it's 5-4 decision, 5-4. How close is that? You know, the right to bear and keep arms is an individual right guaranteed by due process clause in the 14th Amendment. Excuse me? A due process clause in the Fourth Amendment tells you that the Second Amendment is wrong when it says that in order to have a well regulated militia in 2010, 10 years ago, we were saying that it is an individual's right. Judge Alito, individual has the right to bear arms for self-defense. It is deeply rooted and fundamental to the American ideal of liberty. Deeply rooted. From 2008 to 2010, that's how deep his roots were. In American notion of liberty, it goes back to the Constitution, and the Constitution says a well-regulated militia. So it's not until actually 2010, 10 years ago, that we uphold the individual's right to possess guns. When we talk about this, we talk about it like it's some sacred constitutional amendment that we should uphold because we have upheld it for all these years that it's been one of our rights. Please understand that the right of the individual to bear arms doesn't happen until 2010. And the argument now isn't whether or not the individual has the right to bear arms, but it goes back to that argument of what kind of arms. Because we're arguing about whether or not you can have those guns that militias might use that are rapid fire weapons, or should we keep those assault weapons away from the public? That's the argument. You know, that's the big argument. The big argument isn't whether or not the individual should have a collection of guns that he can shoot up the neighborhood. And it's based on what? What is the tradition based on? You know, I don't see what it's based on. I know we had guns when we went out and shot buffalo. I don't think we should have shot the buffalo, but okay. We had guns and shot for our food. Okay. We could have done it with bow and arrows, but we had guns. They could have done it with traps, but we had guns. Okay, the guns were useful.
Yeah, I
But
don't know.
assault
I
weapons?
don't. I don't think guns, in and of themselves, for any special reason, are our I don't know, our national birthright or legend or whatever. It's more so just our history of occupation and control, our settler colonialism, our discovery of the West, and our eradication through total war of the people who live there. Guns are simply what best, most easily, and most flashily, I guess, because there's a lot of flash in them, and never underestimate the inclination for humans to like to show off sometimes, way to display that violence, that I would call it a stain on the national American character of occupation and control, of total war. It's just simply
See?
they were the best and the easiest way to display that level of violence. And now, perhaps it was 2008. I don't know when, this image that I have now, that I don't know how long it exists, of some white dude, and we talk about that too, about how different people of different races are approached and treated by law enforcement, but we know how that goes anyway. Of this dude in the what is it, the bulletproof vest and the AR-15 on the back and the several pistols, that's just in my mind at all these protests. And I don't, did that happen in the 80s? I don't think it did. That seems like a
No,
new
no,
thing, at
no.
least since
Well,
'08 or 2010.
yeah, well, right. That's when it could happen. Before that, you could be arrested for it, depending on what state you were in.
Now you can
But
step out
with
of
these
there
rulings,
dressed
now
like
you can step out
Rambo,
of
like you
there.
were trying to draw
That's right.
first blood.
That's right. That's right. And look here, we want to talk about things that allow it. I'm looking at this guy who killed those people in Boulder, and I'm watching them bring him in a wheelchair in the most sympathetic of ways. You know, he's a character to be pitied, and he has these mental problems.
I mean,
He
undoubtedly,
wasn't
but
brought into well, yeah, but he wasn't brought into court in an orange jumpsuit.
or a straitjacket.
You understand, or a straitjacket, or and chains. We had a guy in the courtroom in chains just for opening his mouth to the judge. In the Chicago 7 trial. But if that was a black guy who killed some white person, he would have been in an orange jumpsuit. Believe me.
No, even just
You know.
flashing to the scene in Georgia where the black lawmaker spoke out and knocked on the door of the governor as he was signing the voter suppression law,
Oh
and that
yeah.
she's being faced with a felony charge, a felony.
Yes. Yes.
Not even
Yes.
just a
Yes.
summary offense, which, okay, whatever. It's a full out felony. Man,
Yes.
they scale of that overreaction is just mind blowing. That's how you create a counter movement, by the way, folks. If you want to create a counter movement to your movement, treat people like that. Keep doing it.
Well, they are doing it more and more and getting away with it more and more. That's my thing. Uh, there was a time when I was growing up, and I was a young man, and I was a protester and whatnot. There were limits on what the police did to you. You know, there were limits even on the use of tear gas. You know, now they come out and SWAT team things with unmarked cars and shoot you on sight, and it's all okay. We have deliberately fostered an atmosphere where we should think of it as being dangerous to protest.
I would also question, the difference between anti-racist and anti-capitalist protest in that too, because they seem much more likely to do it to anti-capitalist protesters.
Oh, any
Or
anti-capitalist or
imperialist.
socialism is just as bad as an N-word per person. Uh, but we're not discriminatory in that way. You know,
Or equal
we got all of
opportunity
our groups,
offenders.
equal opportunity. Right? You could be a part of the LBGT community. And get jumped on for that. Uh, you can find the killer of a transvestite and see that the police treated him well. You can see an offender who walks into a black church and kills 9 people. He's taken out for lunch before he goes to jail. You know, these little things tell us, or that's an indication of what our attitude is at the most basic levels about these things. Not what we say, not what our rhetoric is, not the kabuki theater on top of all this. You know, But under the Kabuki theater, there's cops who still get off. There's the bail is
Oh, I'm
paid
sure they
for
do.
a shooter by a guy who sells pillows. I mean, all these little things add up to what our character, what our national character is, and it enlightens us to carry on the same thing forward, if not more so. Because every time we shoot somebody, the gun sales go up 34%. You know, America is an armed camp within itself with respect to its own citizens.
Turned upon itself.
It's turned upon itself, even nationally. I mean, the FBI, the Home Security, the Patriot Act. I mean, all these things are designed against Americans protesting their government or protesting capitalism or advocating for equal rights or just being different. From what? I don't know, because we're supposed to be so diverse that none of us are different. But somehow or another, we keep this image of America as this certain individual, white citizen that he was in the very beginning. And that should no longer be true. And it should be no longer how we see ourselves. It should be no longer how we treat ourselves in terms of our national character. We should love all.
See, I of course agree, but I think that imaginary white citizen you imagine, like you don't even know how
Mm-hmm.
to think of them because I don't know how to imagine them because it was this falsification. It was never real what the common people thought of. Certainly at the time, they knew that the founding fathers, and also, just as an aside, we don't have to follow their words like they're the Bible or our foundational text of faith. They were not perfect people. They were incredibly imperfect people, especially
I
the
know
more you learn
you.
about them.
You're not talking about the founding fathers. I know that.
Um, yeah, George Washington. Yeah, he's a real
George Washington.
piece of crap. Thomas Jefferson.
Uh, hey,
Even
yeah,
even the good ones, if we want to
yeah,
call them that.
well, however you want to call them, they all were self-interested people, and they all pushed and propagandized the lower classes, if you want to call them that, to fight this war for them, while they stayed on top and kept their properties, and then refused to pay them for their chits and never paid them for their service, and started to take a land away from them, but through taxation that they had earned
Yeah.
through their fighting.
Yeah, I
Uh,
just never think it's a good reason to not do something, to not be bold in how we want to make or change this country by, choosing to go away from what they said. Yo, it was the 1790s. You knew science, but not really. You knew some things, but we're ideally far beyond where you all are now in our understanding. Hopefully.
you know what? About our understanding and about where we are now.
Yeah.
We had this issue about these monuments and whatnot in the South, and these statues that people weren't torn down. In 1920 in Colfax County, they put up a memorial to the three white people who died in that courthouse riot. They called it a riot when it was a massacre, but they had it written in front of it that this is the site on which they died to prevent the unruly. I don't remember exactly, but they were saying that they were not being properly ruled by during Reconstruction, and these three individuals heroically died defending that right. When in fact they went there with cannon and guns and shot up people who were unable to shoot back. you
Right.
know.
So if
But
we
they
were,
constructed this monument in 1920, and if we go down there today and say this is a racist monument, there would be an argument.
so we're giving monuments to white people now, I guess. Finally, why don't we,
Always.
for once, why don't we? Where's the John Brown monument? Where's
Yeah.
his?
I want to see a Nat Turner one.
Hey,
Hey, you know, I want to see Harriet Tubman. You know, I do want to see Nat Turner. Uh,
oh, and what I was gonna, yeah, what I was gonna say
he,
before.
in terms of American values, Nat Turner represents them probably better than any other slave. You know, uh, that's what we start the war against England. That's what we said in our rhetoric. That we were fighting for our freedom against oppressors. you know, well, well,
Yeah, hey.
reward them.
So before we move on, just what I was gonna say, what the position we have, always going back to the founding fathers and revering what they say and believing that it's seemingly the truth sent from on high. It's just a disingenuous argument. It's one of the worst forms of traditionalism, and it's a really just disingenuous way of these hyper traditionalist conservatives to get what they want by enshrining these heroes. This whole concept of the great man or the great person theory is wrapped up in that too. And you see that a lot, of course, in fascist ways of thinking. And I mean, Jung, but well, he was kind of fashy anyway. But no, it's why I tire of hearing arguments that start with the founding fathers, because maybe think for yourself, please.
Did I ever tell you that I came home when I guess I was in the kindergarten before I went to the first grade, and I said to my mother, "Who is my daddy?" And she says, "What? Yeah, yeah, your father is your father. What's wrong with you, boy?" I said, "No, my father died." She says, "What? What are you talking about, boy?" I said, "I learned it in school. Land where my father died. The children's crying, their fathers died. And she got such a big kick out of that. She told that story 1,000 times.
Yeah.
You know how stupid I was.
Yep.
I thought my father wasn't my father because the father of my country was George Washington. And, the pilgrims and all that kind of stuff was my
Well,
background. and,
if
and I
it
listened
makes
to that stuff and,
if it makes you feel better, that's what George Washington wanted
hey,
you to think, or at the
well,
very least, that's what
yeah,
Abraham Lincoln wanted you to think.
yeah, yeah, but I got inculcated with that stuff before they want to talk about who should be teaching who what and what they shouldn't be teaching you in school, because they want to teach you now about stereotypes or not teach you about stereotypes. What they was teaching me in school was just out and out detrimental to my own mental health.
Hey,
you know,
Pledge of Allegiance when they just threw in under
yeah.
God and had everyone in
Oh yeah.
the
Oh
country
yeah.
recite it. I have
Yeah.
no problem with someone, having a belief in God, but should not be included in an oath that has to be recited by every school child in America.
When you have separation of church and state, is that a violation of that?
Well, do we have that though?
I don't know if it's technically a violation, but in terms of spirit, it has to be. I mean, it's the spirit of the law is that there's a separation between church and state, then we cannot bring the church, the church, the Lord or whoever, into our oaths that are secular.
That's true. And
And the same thing goes with our courts. You
and
know,
man, you're just throwing segues one after the other here. And you mentioned the spirit of the law, and that's something that really takes center stage in our next story. That is, of course, that of McGirt versus Oklahoma, the Supreme Court case that gave 40% of Oklahoma back to Native Americans. That's right, right? It's just theirs
yeah.
now.
Well,
Gosh,
by treaty,
wouldn't that be
it
something?
always
Wouldn't that be
was. But
something
that, yeah,
if
but that'll never happen. That
I
will
mean,
never.
yeah, Indian
Never.
territory. You look on maps during that time, for some years it was denoted as Indian territory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's strange. You know how that Second Amendment, whether or not it was a state's right or an individual right, comes out of a Colfax County massacre, or the Miller case where they have two bank robbers. You know, this case comes out of the fact that a man was convicted to life in prison for child sex abuse. And you say, what? What does that have to do with the Indians owning
Yeah,
40% of Oklahoma?
and
You
what
know,
you'd be saying would is understandable because it's pretty freaking ridiculous.
yeah. Well, he argued that his conviction should be overturned since he should have been tried in a federal court, and the court agreed with him because they said this was an Indian
You
reservation.
know, one more child
But
sex
then,
predator getting justice. Thank God.
but explain this to me. If it was an Indian reservation, why should he be tried in federal court? Why shouldn't he be tried in the Indian court?
It seems like they had to go back to the federal courts for the federal courts to tell them that he should have been tried in the Indian court.
Is that right? Did they really say that, or they just said he couldn't be tried in
Well,
the state court?
see, when we talked about spirit of the law, that's what the spirit of it
Uh-huh.
would say. The
Oh, yeah.
actuality
Okay.
of it, however, no, I would doubt it. Only because what the treaty that Native Americans have with the federal government gives them, what jurisdictional rights over that land, right?
Right.
Still
Right. Exactly.
labeled Indian territory, which
Right. Right. Okay. But what is Oklahoma going to do about that?
I don't know. The whites don't really like it.
Of course not.
No,
How about the confiscated argument? The reverse of this by arguing that if 40% of the land went to the Indians, then that would be furthering segregation. How about that fallaciousness? If the
yeah,
Indians own something,
okay.
then that furthers segregation because that belongs to the Indians. But if I own all the white suburbs and everything, that's not segregation. Okay, that's okay. Mm.
No,
So
and
who
also
they?
yeah, also the argument that what was it? The idea. Oh yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Just the fact that if you take this at face value, the idea that Native Americans in the state have jurisdiction at all, the idea is that they get to decide everything.
Right,
It's their choice.
right.
And
Then
then
how?
no, go ahead.
Now I was just going to say, then how could the state then select a commission to make the decisions about how to ameliorate this? I
So
mean,
the state created a commission to make decisions about how to ameliorate this. And included on it were no indigenous activists, no
I
chiefs.
thought that would be I thought if you were going to negotiate a solution, that would be the very point. That you would sit down with the owners of that land, and y'all would look across the table to each other and talk about it as a beginning. I mean,
That's not how
aren't
it
you?
went.
Oh, then they're not recognizing them as the landowners, or what?
No, look, they have to look the rich white men have to get together. I also got to make sure they're all white. I'm just assuming, maybe not. Regardless,
They're all white.
the rich old men
This,
got
if
to.
you read that list of who was on there, you know they're all
Uh,
white. The executive chair and founder of a fracking company, the CEO, a
J.C. Watts
Republican
might not be.
senator, J.C. Watts,
I thought
a
he was
Republican
black guy.
senator from
Yeah,
Oklahoma.
yeah. No, I thought so. I'll look it up.
Really? Okay, yeah, look
Yeah,
that one up. That would be really something. You know, I can tell you if he is, what part of him is black and what part of him ain't. Uh, But Republican Senator Julie Daniels and Representative Mark Lepak are committee members,
Oh no, he's not.
commission members. Yeah, I didn't think so.
Julius Caesar Watts Jr.
Mm.
He was actually a college football quarterback for the Sooners. Played the CFL, and he was in the
Oh,
House of Representatives until
oh,
2003. So he's,
oh, okay.
he's a lobbyist at this point.
Yeah. So here you have all these people. You got people from the oil companies. You got people from the fracking company. You got people who serve as Republicans. You got people who are industry figures. They are all on this commission, and there are no indigenous, Native American, no Indians on this commission to decide about their 40%.
So what's cool is now that the One Oklahoma plan, which is this horrible name for a plan that really just wants to paint itself as inclusive, but the idea is that One Oklahoma is in this commission's image. And the, I hate this quote, but I got to read it because it's so good.
Mm.
I'll have to use an accent or something.
Go ahead.
Oklahoma's founding fathers knew that only by fully integrating all Oklahomans, Native American and non-Native American alike, into their new state and government would the word sovereignty have meaning. At stake is whether we will continue to be one Oklahoma, or whether we will take steps backward toward two parallel societies. Steps backward. What I think the Native Americans would be overjoyed to take steps backwards about 4 centuries before you greedy parasites arrived in the first place. We want to take some steps
Illegal,
backward, then we'll have a unitary society where we're not there. You want to go back to that?
illegal immigrants. Illegal
Yep,
immigrants. Yeah, they were definitely illegal immigrants. I mean, they didn't have no green cards or nothing when they came into Oklahoma.
that's
Are you
right.
kidding me? But now, look, let me ask you this: and if you don't have any Native Americans, and you have frackers and oil people, pipeline people in on this commission, we know that the Native Americans are definitely against fracking. We know that they believe in water. You know, they believe that water is life, so they're against pipelines. You know, but these people who do these things detrimental to what Indians believe are good for our earth and our life and ourselves and our spirit are the ones who are going to be deciding. And these people who believe with all their faith and supposedly it's their land have no part in the decision. Now, how is that one Oklahoma?
Well, look, Bill, one of the statements that the commission had put out that it was redacted because it seemed very paternalistic and terrible said, "You folks just leave it to us. We are your betters and we
Yeah,
know best.
right,
Y'all get
right.
on back to your reservation now, and we'll keep on fracking. We'll keep on smacking. We'll keep on doing whatever we want.
Mm.
Why don't y'all don't come back now? You hear?
Yeah.
No, but
There
that's
was
what
a
they
time.
want. I really want to know what this image of the Native Americans' vision of it to be, because I know damn well it's going to be much more inclusive than it would be had the positions been reversed. I know, like they
uh,
would actually go
uh,
for a solution that is somehow inclusive. Their solution would be inclusive,
yeah, but
guaranteed.
but but what we're taking a look at is why this country keeps doing the same old crazy stuff over and over and over again. It's not enough that we destroyed the beautiful mountains of West Virginia and screwed up every drinking stream, every poisoned every bit of farmland in West Virginia. We called it a resource state, you know, and yet we will go out there and ultimately, if we keep these Indians out of it, we will use Oklahoma as another resource state.
Gosh, you want to talk
You
about
know,
resource states? We're living in one. We're living in the
mm,
aftermath of one. Penn's Woods, you mentioned the other
yes,
week, used to stretch from one end
absolutely,
of the state to the other. This ancient
absolutely,
old growth forest, just like you see now, used to be in Europe. There used to be an old growth forest that spanned the length of
yeah,
Europe, too. And
yeah,
undoubtedly through the Appalachians, that's just how this was. And
yes,
yeah, like we see all these indigenous cultures that made a life off the land and thrived. And I mean, we look around now, they're like, could you really do that? But you can't imagine it in today's view. It has to be how it was 300, 400 years ago, when maybe not exaggerating, you could walk across a river and just walk across the fish. There were so many.
hmm
Maybe not everywhere, but
yeah.
I bet that
Well,
happens some places.
who was that guy? That I guess he was French, or big time philosopher. He came here and visited America and went back and wrote a book.
De Tocqueville.
He made that. Yeah, right. He made that statement that he could walk across the river on the backs of fish.
He actually had
Yeah,
our number
yeah,
pretty
yeah.
well, though. Even
Mm,
then, he had a good read on us.
mm, yeah.
I mean, he talked
Well,
about democracy and its pretty key context, but then also about the self interest and individualism that he really
uh huh,
saw.
uh huh. Well, that's our character, right? Again, we're not willing to face our character. We're willing to believe that when we say one Oklahoma, it means something wonderful instead of it means fracking and oil pipelines and putting people in charge whose only interest is greed. You
And
know,
we look at what can happen when, oil executives and fracking executives and pipeline executives have the power. Look at what happened in Standing Rock. Look at what happened in Minnesota. Look at what happened in all those pipeline cases where people are catching felony charges for even daring to step on a pipeline route. Lord forbid you actually damage pipeline equipment, you're going to jail for 10 to 15 years. And I think it's no surprise that many of the people who receive these cases and these severe sentences are Native American activists.
right? And those who support them, uh, absolutely. But doesn't that bring up the question again and again and again of us facing who we are and what we are? That this is us. You know, we're not that kabuki theater thing that we're sitting up there dramatically talking about one Oklahoma. And that's just theater. That the fracking and the pipelines, that's us. The destruction of nature, that's us. The destruction of the balance. One of the interesting things is how nature can recover if you go into recover nature. If you bring diversity back to farming, the bees return. But as long as you only have that one crop that bees don't need, the bees will stay away. It's a build it and they will come. Recreate this world of diversity farming. Recreate this world of a good, clean, pristine lake and see if the fish don't return. You know,
And I think we could say that about ourselves as well, and perhaps the eventual transformation of ourselves through the transformation of how we live and through nature and the planet. The fact that if we change how we live, we can change our call it national character, call it species character, call it whatever. That can change too. That's not inevitable. Like we can transform ourselves, but it's not just through wanting to. It's not through proclaiming slogans like one Oklahoma when that's not what you mean.
it's
It's not by
nonsense.
putting forth slogans like America first when you're really just
Nonsense.
spouting racist garbage.
Or even America is back when you're talking about imperialism. Yeah, America is back. Therefore, everybody else stands aside. Even though the dollar is failing around the world and our economy is going to pot, America is back. Watch it, y'all. We will threaten you. We will sanction you because we're back. Y'all, get a hold of yourselves, man. Yeah, all that arrogant stuff don't mean anything anymore. Right now, from this point on, you're selling wolf tickets. You know, you can't even take care of your own people in a COVID virus situation. You got the most people dying all over the world, and yet you're going to tell everybody else how to live. You're going to talk about whether or not they have prison labor in China, and you got so many people who are in jail making bras for Victoria's Secret and packaging for McDonald's and all the rest of it. You want to talk about slave labor? Who is fighting the forest fires? You know, get that out of your head that you're talking about somebody else. Get the log out of your own eye before you talk about the splinter and the other guys.
It's actually something we should revisit soon too, because I've heard reports of late, more substantive than I had before, that the forced labor in the Uyghur refugee camps is in fact not, and that there's a lot of obviously propaganda going on
Right.
about the state of their people. I don't think they're even denying the re-education
No,
camps.
they say that they're re-education camps. In the same way that we say that, well, when we put people in jail, yeah, we got more people in
Oh,
jail than they got in China. You know, we
well,
got
we
more
got more
people in
people in
slave
jail than the rest
labor.
of the world, not
Yeah,
combined,
right.
but than anyone else in
Okay.
the world.
Well, yeah, okay, and all those people are subject to slave labor. Yeah, and there's no reorientation going. In other words, rehabilitation.
Yep.
We just continue to use them as slaves for the rest of their lives. I don't know what the Chinese mean by rehabilitation, but that's what they say is going on. You know, and I
And
don't,
maybe
I
that's
don't.
something worth investigating, maybe, but we got a lot of other stuff here we can
You see,
fix.
I am of this nature. That you fix the hole in your own shoe before you talk about somebody else needing shoes. You know, we got to make a nation worthy of calling it democracy
Or at the very
before we
least,
teach democracy.
realize that your shoe needs fixed and endeavor to start fixing it. Get a clue
Well,
first. Even take
yeah,
2 steps down the path. Take
but
one.
show the other guy well shined repaired shoes.
That's
Don't tell the other guy he should fix his shoes when yours are holy.
that's
Yeah, these are my golf shoes. Your golf shoes, yeah. Well, I got 9 holes. You know, if you're wearing golf shoes, how are you going to teach the other guy how to wear shoes? If you're not going to be a democracy, how are you going to teach the world about democracy? If you use slave labor from the time of your origin up until now, and now you do it through the penal system, which is not that new, because our jails were always used that way, our prisons were always used that way, our state prison system was always used that way. Don't forget, we used to lend people out to work on roads and work in different factories and different industries from our jails, always, up until today. You know, and also that the current president of the United States is the person who put together the bill that incarcerates so many into slavery. And we don't even ask him about things like that when he has a so called press conference.
yeah.
We charge the Chinese with slavery, but we won't ask our own government about slavery.
If you really believe that, shut down private prisons for good, not just the one that are federal, not just the ones that are federal. Shut them
I
all
believe
down
that we should
if you mean it.
we should take a look at places like Finland and whatnot and see how they treat criminals. You know, they don't even have basic prisons like that. People live in halfway situations where they go to work and they're under supervision and et cetera. But they continue education, they continue work, they continue learning how to be a responsible citizen while they're paying for their crime.
And it all
You know,
comes back to confronting the disease of violence that just inhibits this nation and this culture. And yeah, I don't think the one thing will do it. Maybe it has to be many things at the same time,
well, sure,
but it needs to
but
be
first it
done.
starts with the mind. It starts with making a commitment to doing it, and that's where we fall short. When we say we have a problem with violence, we say whether or not we should have a new kind of background check, as if that's the answer. You know, we don't talk about the issue as it is the issue. If the issue is hate and violence, the issue is hate and violence. It's not a background check.
Mm.
You know, but then we have the president stand up there and say, "Well, he's not even going to tackle gun violence because he's interested in infrastructure." Yeah, okay. You know, okay, whatever. You know, but you know where we're going down the hill fast, man. The skis are ahead of us. You know what happens when the skis get ahead of you?
Well, you fall, I imagine. I'm not much into
Yeah. Oh,
skiing.
yeah.
You trip, you
Oh,
fall.
yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. You fall.
he's and here's a fun story. I don't want to talk about it too much because, well, I don't know that much. I just think it's a fun story. The shipwreck in the Suez Canal. That seems like something, you're skiing down the hill, your skis get a little ahead of you. That's the giant log that's going the whole way of the hill that you can't
Yeah.
avoid.
Amen.
And really, at this point, I just want to talk about this in the context of how feeble the global marketplace is and why it's a terrible idea in the first place. Why we don't need frozen food from halfway across the world.
Right.
We set
Right.
ourselves up for these situations.
Right.
We sh-
We set
we should
ourselves
not be
up.
relying on a canal the entire way across the world to never get stuck. And man, I really applaud this captain. They did a cool little pattern. Looked like
Mm.
the bait and tackle. They did a little bait and tackle before they proceeded to lodge themselves in the canal there. So in the
Mm.
GPS, that was fun. So I do kind of wonder if this is just some elaborate form of protest. I'm sure it's not, right? No
No,
one's
I
no
don't
one's
think so.
that no one's that wild.
But you know what I thought of when I first saw that ship there? I grew up on a street called Mercy Street in South Philadelphia. It's a small, skinny little street, and it's a problem. It's a problem as trucks come down that street. If you have to move and you have to bring a moving truck in or something, you got some real serious problems. A lot of places where we have those narrow streets, we got signs up, no trucks, you know, no buses or whatever, because they're too big to handle. They're too big for the street. The Suez Canal was not built for horse and buggy like Mercy Street was, but it wasn't built for these big ships either. It was built for regular little sedans, and here we come with double semi tractors. You know, these ships, the size, the length of it is the height of the Empire State Building on that narrow canal. You can't expect that at some point you're going to have this kind of a situation because it's too much. You don't bring the truck onto the little street. You're going to hit cars. If that truck has an accident, that street will be bottled up. You know, it's just the same thing with the Suez Canal or any one of these canals. When did they build it? They're talking about expanding the width of the Panama Canal to accommodate this very kind of thing. Well, your shipping has outstripped the what do you call it? Where they have to go?
Well,
It's
hey,
too big.
yeah. Well, I mean, look, the good news is in Panama, they won't need to displace an entire indigenous population again. That's
Yeah,
already
right.
done. So you could just, expand. You wouldn't have to engage in warfare again just to expand. You already did that. So
Yeah,
it's easier, at
yeah.
least.
Well, I like the the more local things are, the better off we are. I mean, just as a general rule, whether or not you're talking about apples, oranges, or sewn goods, or garlic, or whatever it is, you know. But we got this so-called global trade system, and one thing that it says here to me, between here, the Suez Canal, the Gulf of Hormuz, the traffic that goes through there. Why in the world would you start a war in the Middle East? Why would you attack Iran? What do you think would happen? It won't be one ship bottling up the Suez Canal. It won't be one ship bottling up the Gulf of Human. All the traffic would stop. There will be mines. There will be missiles. The world trade would stop. You know, that would be the result of your arrogance, of telling another nation that you will sanction it because you don't like the way they live or who they elect. Even though you don't have the power basically to sanction anybody anymore, quite frankly. That's just a
Minor detail.
yeah.
Yeah.
you know, but you still exercise that arrogance. China is starting to sanction you back. you know, hey, Europe said, okay, we're going to sanction you. China said, okay, here's some for you. I mean, the dollar is losing its value all over the place everywhere, and Russia and China are hooking up. so, so what we're doing is leaving ourselves out of it. Iran, okay, we won't trade with Iran, but now Russia's doing 600 million or 600 billion or wherever it is, and China is trading with them. And China is going into Venezuela, and we're complaining because the Russians got airplanes flying down there. But we don't do anything but sanction these people, and we expect them not to make friends with the rest of the world. But God darn it, anymore, they got friends all over the place, and there's a lot of people almost just as big as you are.
Well, our scope is infinitesimally small, and our foresight is 5 feet in
Yeah.
front of our face. So,
Mm.
what do we really expect? We
Yeah.
we have
We
no
expected.
we have no skill for planning. We have no grand vision except for I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know what's this grand vision.
What grand vision? We don't have any grand
Yeah,
vision.
that's
We haven't had one for a long time. You
and
know,
then it was a Monroe
all
Doctrine.
all of the good ones. Well, yeah, the Monroe Doctrine. But when we had good things happening here, where we say, we can envision all of our people living out of poverty. That was a great vision, and we started working on it, and then we stopped because it's working, because we need poor people,
Do you know
because we need people.
who didn't stop? China, and they've
Yeah,
nearly
right.
eliminated poverty at this time.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
It's a mindset. It's what your
and
ambition
Russia,
is as a country.
and look at Russia. I don't think they eliminated poverty, but by enshrining a
Yeah,
living wage in their constitution, that was a
right.
step. That's a big
That's
step.
a big step, bro. Yeah, and the other thing that happened in Russia too is 2008 and the sanctions that we put against them, and the threat that we made to global world trade and all that kind of stuff that was going to be detrimental to Russia. So they learned how to be self-sufficient. It wasn't like they needed you. It's like they traded with you. They used you like you used them. But then when you get arrogant about it, they don't need you. And they've proven it. They've developed an economy that has nothing to do with you anymore. And the same thing is true of a lot of big nations in this world anymore. They're developing economies that have nothing to do with you, and they have nothing to do with this globalism. You know, they will trade amongst themselves. And if Australia doesn't want to trade with China, China will say, so what? If Japan doesn't want to trade with China, so what? You know, if you want to keep your allegiance to where people whose dollar bill is going down the drain, then go ahead and do that. You know,
And we want to see
but
why
they
it's
don't
going
care
down the
anymore.
drain. You can connect it to the same short sightedness and arrogance that led you to sanction and contend with your former trade partners and allies. It's all, part of the same arrogance. And
We're sanctioning Germany. Germany,
Oh, but
our friend.
they're one of our colonies. Why would we sanction
Yeah.
them?
Oh, yeah. Well, because of the pipeline that they're building with Russia. Yeah.
Well,
We can't allow
maybe
that to
they
be
need
completed.
some freedom. 'Cause we're right there. We could give them some freedom.
Mm,
Maybe
yeah.
some homespun democracy to really shore up their efforts.
I think we need to learn what democracy is.
Oh no,
You
we'll show
know,
them. We'll demonstrate it.
well, we need to show ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, if we're complaining, for example, right now about whether or not the Republicans passed a bill in Georgia that takes away democracy. And it's not the first time that we had such bills and such efforts as to take away the voting rights of all kinds of people that we didn't want to give voting rights in the first place. You
Sure.
know, we just had this law. I mean, one of the aspects of that law I find interesting, though. I mean, they say that in order to cast a absentee ballot, that you would have to use your driver's license or state ID number. And the significance of this is that numbers of people, of course, in the state don't have IDs or numbers, driver license, and they just tend to be minorities, etc. But what I find interesting about this is that right now, when they get absentee ballots, they argue over signatures. You know, and signatures is a nebulous argument that you can rant and rave about on and on and on and on, and never guarantee that you got a statement as to the effect that this is this person's signature for sure. But with a driver's license number, you can't ignore that this vote was cast by John Henry or John Henry Jr. because they will have different license numbers. You can no longer go from state to state and say this person voted in another state because he has the same name, because he would have done so with a license number. So in that way, that bill, I think, actually can be to the benefit. They might be passing it thinking it's a detriment because it will in the short term, stop certain people from voting. But in the long term, as all those people do, in fact, get state ID cards, you have no more reason that you could stop them from voting.
I gotta say, in the long term, in the short term, though, it will be rather detrimental. And I guess I also am concerned that I remember reading about this when Georgia was going through the other round of voter suppression. It seems to happen there pretty often.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that they reduced the number of driver's licensing centers to, I think,
Oh
one or
yeah,
two in the
sure,
state. So
sure,
that you may have to drive 4 or 5 hours to get a
sure,
driver's license.
sure.
Just
Yeah,
all
yeah.
this little procedural, institutional stuff to make it as hard as possible to
Well,
engage in the democratic system.
that tells you where we are as a democracy. This is what we do consistently. But as you know, and as I know, we both learned during that election in 2016 and 20 what 2012. uh, that both parties do a lot of things to suppress the vote when they think the vote is not going to be in their favor. And when the Democrats, it was mostly in the primaries, you know. But we don't talk about if you say right now that there's some problems with voting. If you say there's problems with voting, then they say that you're a Trumper. You know, they say that there was absolutely no problems in our last election. They say we had an absolute pristine election. I don't believe that.
Well,
And I believe that we need to talk about all these voting issues and make sure that we can ultimately get a system that recognizes democracy because we don't have that system now. But we will argue that and put you, cancel you, even as we call it today, for making a statement that we should take a look at this. And that is anti democratic.
yeah, that would be. No, and I really do have a question as to whether I know it would benefit the Democrats to get more votes to enfranchise everyone at this time. And so that argument is a really easy one to make and seem virtuous. I guess what I also wonder is, were the positions reversed, would they be doing the same thing the
No,
Republicans are now?
of course not.
And I would be led to think, yeah, probably.
Yeah,
Probably so.
absolutely. Yeah, I thought the question was going the other way, but yes, absolutely,
No.
because that's been
Yeah.
done. Yeah, that's been done. I mean, the same things that they're arguing about now was done on the other side at another time. You know,
And certainly
you
against
know,
progressives within the party itself.
no, don't even talk about that. I mean, everything has been done against progressives within the party, including what's the most recent thing? The party officials walked out because Bernie Sanders people won seats. You know,
Oh, to be fair, they won all the seats.
well, but they didn't. There were still the positions to be filled as representatives of regents and all that other kind of thing. You know, you walk away from the. I mean, it's just crazy. You walk away from the party because you don't like who got elected. that's that's democracy. Okay,
Yeah, a bunch
you
of,
know.
I guess, when Joe Biden won the nomination, a bunch of people were fools for not doing that at that time and ended up helping him win. So, congratulations on that.
Well, there's a lot of people. I mean, look, and the press included, and all these different politicians, including it bothers me, Norm Chomsky. Who tells us that we have to put up with the Biden because he's the lesser of two evils. You know, the lesser of two evils killed people in Syria and is responsible for building those cages down there at the border that they don't take any responsibility for, and everything is on Trump. And they don't even let you see what's going on down there, but they're transparent. I mean,
It's
they had a press conference where nobody asked a question that was and certainly not a follow up to any of these issues that are going on here and around the world. I mean, they had a whole press conference, and all they asked is like, "How is your dog today?" I mean, kabuki theater in the utmost extreme, a meaningless press conference. From a man who called on people whose questions he knew in advance and the limited number of people that he would call on. You know, it's theater. And we're looking for democracy, not theater. At least, for example, in my day, you could put JFK up there and everybody could ask him about anything, sort of like Putin today, you know.
so, I
But
mean, Bill, I guess I would ask you this. Are you sure? Or were you maybe not, thinking about it at that time? Maybe it was just as
no,
much of a setup
yeah,
back then.
I'm sure there's aspects of that, but I'm also sure that there was a lot more give and take. You know, and even up until recent, there was a lot more give and take. Now everything is staged. Everything is scripted. You know, no, I know there was a lot more give and take, but yes, you're right. I mean, it was controlled. You know, but we got issues, and this country, as a matter of fact, it really actually used to argue about issues. It actually used to argue about whether or not there should be poverty. Now we just accept it. You know, of course, we didn't come up with adequate answers, but at least we argued about issues, is what I'm saying.
Well, haven't you heard being poor makes you strong?
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, that's not true. And a true believer in that concept is the focus of our next topic, who is the House of Windsor, who appoints a czar of diversity.
I think that's the funniest thing I heard of.
Yep.
Outside of what's that woman's name? Sharon, or on the what's her
Osborne,
name?
Sharon Osborne.
Osborne.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the talk show.
I didn't know what she
Uh,
did. I don't know why she quit.
she quit. I'll tell you why she quit. It's really a good story. Piers Morgan.
I sure do.
the British guy who had the British talk show, and
Stand up
they
guy.
had this stand-up guy. Well, he didn't believe anything Meghan Markle had to say about racism in the palace and whatnot, etc.
He
You
had
know,
apparently creeped on her for a while too.
yeah, he did, and she didn't go for him, and he had animosities towards her. Uh, but at any rate, he said these things, and he really castigated her, and he ended up walking off his show. Well, this Sharon, what's her name, Osborne?
Osborne,
She
Ozzy's
defend
wife.
she defended him, you know, and one of the other hosts said, why are you defending him or something? And she says that people are calling her a racist because she defended him, etc. Well, she got mad that day, and she had a very bad outburst on the show against this kind of passive comedian, black woman,
Oh, Whoopi.
and she ended up walking off the show. Not Whoopi,
I was
the
gonna
other
say
one.
Whoopi is not passive. I didn't know of another black
No,
comedian
no,
on
no,
there.
no, no, no. It isn't. Yeah, uh, but she walked off the show that day, and they had the show off the air for a couple of weeks while they investigated her. They learned that in the past she had referred to this other black woman as being too ghetto and got her kicked off the show. She had referred to this Asian woman in some derogatory terms, and I don't know if she ended up getting her kicked off the show, but she quit because of it. You know, she ended up talking. They found out about her, or they exposed her, because I don't think they just simply found out about it. I think they'd known all along about homosexual animosities towards homosexuals and transvestites or trans people in general. You know, I mean, she had a whole background for a couple of years of these kinds of things. It wasn't just the outbursts on that show. And when all of these things came up as the issue, then she felt that she better get the heck out of there. You understand? Uh,
Yeah,
but it all started because she was defending this Piers Morgan. But you're the I think it's funny that Meghan Markle accuses the royal family of prejudice, racism, and it says that one individual at least was concerned about how dark their baby would be, and
and that
oh,
individual was a queen.
they
I
wouldn't
mean,
say.
let's be real.
They wouldn't say who it was. Now I'm not going to say it was the queen, but the queen
Let's,
said that this was a personal family issue, and the family would handle it. Right? Okay. And the prince, what's his name? William.
Charles?
He said Charles.
I
He
don't know.
said he said that there was no racism.
Oh,
Okay. So
that was William.
that was William.
No, he said we're not a
Okay.
racist family.
We're not a racist family.
That was good. That was a good one.
Okay. So then the next announcement is we're going to elect or select or pick or have, however you say it, a diversity czar in the palace.
Man,
A diversity
that family was really just
czar?
hungering for another czar, weren't they?
you know, the question is look, I say to you, you're racist. And you say to me, I'm going to get diversity. you know, I mean, yeah, you don't say anything to me about, oh, yeah, well, I'll deal with my racism and whatnot. You say, I'm going to get more diverse. Now, answer me this, and this is what I find very amusing. If we're talking about a family, what is the diversity czar going to do in a family? What's he going to say? You need to marry an Indian, and you need to marry. You two need to marry as lesbians, and we need another black child. Why don't you adopt one? I
let's
mean,
let's
well,
really hope it doesn't go down that path, please. I hope
what is a diversity czar going to do with a
is I'm
family?
just assuming that it's someone who goes along to public appearances and really ensures that they don't say or do anything overtly racist. I think that's going to be mostly the extent of it. like a manager, like a
Oh,
racism manager for their whole
they're going to
family. They might
hire.
need a
They're going to
few.
hire. They're going to hire a black lesbian who, no, no, a black transvestite.
Gender. Do you? Ideally,
Gender.
please. Yeah.
You know,
Please stop.
they're going to hire a person like that to represent them as diversity, and then they're going to bring this person out every once in a while and say, "See, we have a diversity czar," you know. And look at her; she covers all the bases. You know, yeah, she's a dark skinned person, and she's a
Here's
female, and
another
she
picture
used
of
to.
us being carried through the jungle on a palanquin by our slaves. But no, we're not racist.
No,
Not a
no, we're
racist
going to
bone in
put
our family.
what we're going to do is like if we're being carried through the jungle, and what we're going to do is make sure that one of those people doing the carrying is a white person.
Oh, Prince William's like, we're not a racist family. Look at my brother. Look who he married.
Right,
We got
right.
one.
That's like back in
Lord.
the day, you say, "Oh, I don't have anything against black people. I know one." you know, you know, I ate with a black person once. I mean, it's just I find it all amusing. I find it all very, very, very amusing. I have to admit that I spent a lot of my early life worrying about being a black guy in America, and I'm spending most of the rest of my life laughing at those who aren't. you know,
Yeah, we're pretty ridiculous, admittedly.
no, come on. I mean, you know, there's some really insane notions here. I mean, when people start saying that the reason that we are killing Asians is because Satan is at work. you know, I say, hey, bro, like you don't want to take no responsibility for this. I mean, like we used to have that sign, the devil made me do it. We a lack of responsibility. Adam in the Garden of Eden. Well, God, you gave me that woman, and she look at what she did. It's your fault, God. You gave her to me. you know, I mean, anything not to take responsibility for ourselves. and look, I'm gonna tell you honestly. I don't, as a human being, have anything particularly against individuals and white people in general.
Oh,
But I will
right.
say
Thanks.
this that yeah, that white people have a terrible history. Wherever you go, whether you go to China or Africa or India, the Middle East, wherever you go in the world, the white people have a terrible history. And the influences that they have between Europe and America today is still considered to be a white influence, and it's still a terrible history because they take the global south and act arrogantly against it, and because they take all the brown people in the world and it's okay to bomb them. You know, it's they still have a terrible history, and they need to catch up to themselves. They have to stop seeing themselves as being the know all, save all, of the world, and recognize that they need to come on down here with the rest of us, and we should all deal with each other eye to eye. You know, get down off that horse.
For
It's a
sure.
rocking horse anyway.
And you know of so many people in Great Britain itself who are working class people who are part of the Tory party, who are colonialists, who still believe in the empire, who still think that Great Britain should strike out again against the global south. And there are those who believe that that heyday of British imperialism should return. And to be clear, it never will, and it was bullshit in the first
Mm-hmm.
place. But they still
Uh,
somehow think that they should get it back, and that that's
mm-hmm.
somehow the glory that their nation should pursue.
Well, is that different than America back? Well, yeah, because they did have a solid hold on
I
the
was going to
world.
say they were pretty successful.
Yeah, they were. Yeah,
We
they
just
were
wanted to
pretty.
be.
Yeah, we just want to. Yeah, We got 1,000 bases and 800 that we admit to, 1,000 in reality, and a whole bunch of other secret ones, around the world that we try to use to enforce our superiority. And our superiority should never be based on testosterone and military might. It should be based on our values and our institutions and the well being of our people that people can observe and say, wow, wow, I would love to live in a country like that. You know, a country that says that nobody will earn below the level of poverty, the standard of cost of living, not even the level of poverty, the cost of living. You
Wow,
know,
for
so a
real.
country that says I want to bring all my people up from poverty and doesn't. I mean, those kind of places.
We can't even get 15.
I was talking the other day. I was at a doctor's appointment. We got to talking about global warming, and we're talking about how we can't handle global warming, and the question became around to COVID. So heck, we can't even handle COVID. you know, I heard a discussion the other day where they said, well, places like China and Cuba and Vietnam and North Korea, they did a very good job, and at handling COVID, and then we would counter and say,
I wonder
uh,
why.
we have individual freedom. You know, And I just wonder, like, why do we think that individual freedom means that you have the freedom to ignore other people, that you don't care about other people's welfare, that the only person that you should care about is your own private self? Why is personal freedom based in being competitive against people instead of cooperative with people? You know, I don't understand the notion of freedom, where I'm not concerned about your welfare as well as I'm concerned about mine.
And I
And
think
then
when
we'll
we
both
went
be
back
free.
and talked about it, that's what we found out. That those who came from a collective culture did much better than with COVID and seemingly with any other significant communal challenge than countries who encouraged competition, countries who encouraged, capitalism. We found that their success rates were vastly higher.
Yep.
Whereas we sit here and our drug makers won't even give up the patent for a life saving medicine and who plan to charge more once they declare the pandemic over.
And are charging more as the pandemic goes on. Excuse me. Yeah, the outward statement would be when it's over. But the fact of the matter is that there are these shortages, et cetera, so that the price goes up. And the renegotiations on the part even of our president with these drug companies that were a secret, you can
Mhm.
believe that the price went up. You
But then
know,
then it just goes back to as well. It's up to them. They make the choice, regardless. It's up to them, and the people have very little, if any, say about it.
and the fact that we have no medical infrastructure, no healthcare infrastructure. Even in Israel, for example, and I have a lot of things I don't like about Israel. I'll admit that. Uh, but in Israel, they did a good job of vaccinating the people. And why did they do such a good job of vaccinating the people? Well, because their country was already divided into 6 health zones. The country was already regionally attacking health issues. And consequently, they plugged into that system that already existed. We are still, what are we talking about today? Oh, we're going to open up a place over there. Oh, we're going to open up a place over there where you can come get vaccinated. We're still looking for places to vaccinate people. Our planning, our organizing is going on after the fact, not prior to the pandemic, not in case of a pandemic. We don't have health zones. We don't have bottom up planning as they do in Cuba. You know, we don't have neighborhood clinics like they do. We don't have preventive medicine ideas inculcated in our communities.
Yeah,
All we have is a system that teaches our doctors what drugs to use and how much to charge.
that's absolutely right. And that's the thing about pandemics. You don't choose to be ready for a pandemic. You are just ready because it's going to come. I think I said that backwards. Like, you aren't just ready for a
Hmm.
pandemic. You have to plan
Uh-huh.
for it. You have to have stuff
Hmm.
in place long before there's even the imagination for it, because
Hmm.
a simple understanding of history and of human civilization will tell you that these kind of things happen. This is not an aberration. It's actually an aberration that it's been so long since we've had one.
Absolutely.
And
1918.
regardless, you got to be ready. And we weren't.
Yep. Well, we look. The latest thing, if you talk to our president today, we will not recognize a need for universal health care. We will give $50 billion to the pharmaceutical companies, but we will not give 10,000 to a person for health care over their life. You know, well, then we don't care. I'm sorry. If we don't care about protecting our people's health, if that's not at the bottom of our whole drive as a society, then it doesn't, it can't work. It can't work. You know,
So, in conclusion, it can't work. Certainly as it stands now.
no. What we have is a structure. Don't forget what happens. Look around. Even today, they're still closing rural hospitals. You know, even today, hospitals in certain areas of our country, certain areas of our city are underfunded, are under-equipped. And we don't allow people who live in those communities to go outside of those communities to other hospitals for treatment because they don't have the proper whatever appearance when they come in the door. You know, we have cut back the numbers of nurses to the bare minimum. We've cut back a kind of face mask, say, for example. Those things that you use to breathe, for example. You know, these things we import because they're not profitable enough for us to make. Again, it's like talking about why do we have sports? I mean, we have sports to make money. Is that what it's all about? We have hospital to make money. Is that what it's all about? You know, I saw a report on this old folks home, this nursing home that was closing, and the reason it was closing it was because it is a quote competitive market. Well, this nursing home serves the poor. It can't compete in the market. You know, well, what about this purpose of serving the poor? Should that purpose be market driven or value driven? Should we not have a value that we want to care for our citizens? And everything that we do should not just be a money maker. Everything that we do doesn't have a bottom line accountant. There's some things we do because it is the right thing to do. Universal health care is one of them.
And especially since the other option for those people is homelessness or just death.
How many people in this country who are middle class fall into bankruptcy because of medical problems?
Mm.
But we don't need universal health care.
No, oh, well,
All the
no, of course not.
rich and poor nations around this world have universal health care. You know, not just the rich nations, you know, but poorer nations recognize the need to take care of these people's health. You know, I put Cuba up as the prime example, but you can go through South America and see how there's more and more concern about these quote socialistic principles. You know,
Well, yeah, we don't abide by socialists here at Reach Out. So, just keep that in mind. Keep your socialism at home, Bill. No, I'm
yeah,
kidding.
right
We
on,
we love
right on.
socialists here.
No, I can't
So
wear it on my shoulder.
just we got to wrap up, but I want to tease one topic I really want to get into next week because I kind of blew me away. Not a huge surprise, I guess, but the NYPD issuing 217,000 subpoenas against
Yeah.
its opponents. So
Yeah.
they're doing it mostly through provisions in the Patriot Act. And it's weird. It sounds like such a cool act because who doesn't want to be a patriot, right? Who doesn't want to support their country? And yet, I don't know. This doesn't sound too cool to me. So we'll get into
Yeah.
that next week.
And tell them that some of those are policemen. Of course, journalists, but some of them are policemen
Yeah,
themselves. If they
the
say something
so-called
critical.
good cops who are speaking out against the bad cops.
Yeah. Well, again, it comes back to the character of our nation, ladies and gentlemen. It comes back to the character of our nation. You
So,
know,
yep. So from these two characters, my name is Justin Geist. That's Bill Jameson.
right
Thank you
on.
for listening and for watching. This has been Reach Out.
Peace, y'all.